Welcome to Chasing Squirrels podcast. I am really, really excited for the conversation today for a couple different reasons. It's pretty wonderful where one podcast can kind of handshake or dovetail to the next podcast. So quite a few months ago, I tried to set up a conversation with Richard Erdman, and I'm happy I have that one in the bank, and you can listen to that episode talking about being a digitally enhanced or accelerated principal. And when I finally got that conversation finished, coming out of the conversation, both he and another colleague, Monica Wand, mentioned that if I have any interest at all in learning about outdoor ed or place-based education, or just seeing how a classroom can be expanded by including outdoor spaces, that I should talk with Tanya Murray. So in trying to set that up, as it always does, takes a little bit of time. And I'm really, really happy to say I finally got Tanya on the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Tanya.
Thanks, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Could you throw down just a little bit of an introduction for yourself, what you're doing right now in education?
Sure can. You've hit me at a very interesting part, a very exciting part in education. And that is that in September, a new role, a new adventure awaits me at the board office. So I'll be taking on a newly created role, which is also the exciting part. It's a consultant position in our board that supports building capacity for environmental literacy and outdoor learning.
So the new role, it's new for you or new for the board?
It is new for me and it is new for the board. So both, which is very exciting. It's almost, people have asked me what the mandate will be, what the portfolio will look like. And although I know a little bit about that, I think the exciting part about this job is we really get to create it and navigate and take risks and figure out what this role might look like in our board.
So I've had a similar moment with somebody else that was moving into, let's say, the leadership position where they did have the freedom to create the position. And the question, I guess the conversation that we had is, does it help in creating a position like this when it really is like you? So for instance, if the board suddenly decided to create a podcasting position, and the fact that, and they say, okay, you can develop the curriculum and the angle and stuff like that. And I come in and I'm like, well, I've done a few podcasts, I guess I can do it. But I always wonder when, that area of specialty is not just what you've learned, but it's kind of what you live and breathe. How does that sort of play into your planning? Does it help? Does it kind of distract? What do you think?
I think for me, it's just there's a certain excitement that goes with that. It's an intersection of my personal life and professional life right now, really, and all the things that maybe I had been trying to fit in outside of teaching because I was passionate about those things and I still wanted to stay connected to those organizations and those movements. Now I'm able to actually hone in and focus on those exclusively and almost bring them more to life within our board in a more systems way. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's kind of like where it feels like being recognized or noticed.
It's
You're
dreamy.
sort of like, okay, now the board's kind of they're kind of seeing me. They're kind of seeing the activities that would benefit kids and even benefit the board as a whole, let's say.
Well, that's what's exciting to me is that I think outdoor learning, environmental literacy, whatever you're calling it, right? There's so many different entry points, but what is exciting is that at the systems level, that this is really being recognized, and not only money is being thrown down, but resources and people are excited and inspired. And I think as a board, that to me is the most exciting part about this job, is that it actually just exists, right? Because 5 years ago, this would be a dream for me, right? I remember talking about it. It would be wonderful if this position was in the board, and now it's here. That's I think is the most exciting part.
So, the your heart, as you mentioned, your heart and soul, like this is a portfolio that bridges or embraces, I guess, personal, professional. I'd like to back up a little bit though. So coming into teaching, what's a little bit of your backstory there? Did you have teachers in your family? Was education, a second thought? Did you always want to be a teacher? What's your sort of EDU origin story?
Yeah, well, it's actually funny because my mom was a teacher and she worked in alternative education as similar to you. And I remember saying, I'm never going to be a teacher, right? I'm not going to be a teacher. I want to be in education, I want to be an educator. I want to work with children, but I didn't want to be a teacher. And maybe part of the reason was I just didn't see myself in a classroom, right? I always saw myself kind of outside the box. And so for quite a long time, I resisted teaching, and I was a wilderness guide. And then I worked for an organization actually here in York Region called Trails Youth Initiative. And I was a director there for several years, taking kids on a 4-year experience. And I learned so much from that. And at the end of that kind of phase, I decided that actually what I really wanted to do is make a difference, and how could I make a difference in the largest capacity? And I decided to jump in to teaching. So I started in junior, went to intermediate, down to primary. I've been in all the divisions, and I guess that's important to me because I just love working with kids of all ages. I think it doesn't matter to me. There isn't one age group that I prefer. At Trails, I worked with secondary students and elementary students. And I imagine through having kids of my own, I've moved down to more of the early years and really have been loving that lately, in terms of working with those young people who are sponges and really want to kind of learn about the world around them and are curious about that. So when it comes to outdoor learning, it sometimes doesn't get any better than working with those early years. But really, I think in terms of my story, I feel like it's always been about connecting to nature. And when I look back, it's not just about students and student voice, because I've always been passionate about student voice, but it's about kind of like my colleagues too, and being open so that they have a voice as well, especially ones that, maybe a new teacher who doesn't feel like they have a lot to offer. I've always been one to stand up and say, you do have so much to offer, right? And just making sure that everyone who is surrounding me has that voice. And I think outdoor learning has shown me that it is such a platform for all kids, all students, all teachers, all administrators. Everybody has a story that connects to some sort of outdoor space. So I just love tapping into that.
That's awesome. I couldn't agree with you more. My backstory to teaching was I worked in hospitality for many years, and I came to a space in life where I felt like there was time for change. There was opportunity to move forward further into hospitality or to try something new. And I've found that my change into education as a teacher has been amazing, because I think when I moved into education, I looked at it as a door opening, a door closing. So choosing that path into education meant that my hospitality stuff might not be applicable. I'm going to become a teacher now. It's a rite of passage. You move through that portal, and you are now something different. But I will say some of the most amazing moments, I think, in my 12 years so far are the ones where I've been able to kind of harmonize my life experience with a classroom moment in time where the student is right there at the center. Like they're there, so they can exist in your story. They can exist in whatever they're learning. And it strikes me that this is something that, in looking at a really broad kind of swath of what outdoor education can be, what I keep coming back to is how student-centered it is. Like just the information seems to suggest that just by being outside and making decisions that go along with being outside, from dressing yourself to walking carefully to noticing to, there's just something that more naturally puts the student at the center of that story. What do you say to that?
Yeah, and they're just, I mean, they're so engaged that really the challenges you might have in the four walls of a classroom just don't seem to exist, and they seem to have space to deal with what they need to deal with, whether it's right self-regulation and they need to move their body a little bit and then come back, or hyper focus on something in the forest. I just think it's it is all about student voice, and I think I'm still reaching a point where I catch myself all the time going back to, am I leading this or are they leading this? And especially with young people, right? We really want them to be recognized as capable and competent. And I think you could say that not just in early years, all the way up. I mean, on my Twitter feed, I found this quote, and I don't know who wrote it, but it's so true that all these things change and there's all of these trends that come up. But really, kids are the same, and they love to have time to play outside. They're learning when they're playing. They love time outdoors, and they love to be heard and valued for who and what they are. I think that is really important, and I have got to know students so much, like on such a deeper level when I'm outside with them. And I said that way back when I would lead canoe trips, I want to bottle it up. I'd always ask, why is it so magical? Why do people really learn about themselves? Why can they open up? Why are they, they can be vulnerable yet learn and take risks? Why is it that this environment creates that? And I think we have a lot of research that backs that, but I think there's still this untouchable piece that I wish we could allow people to see why it's so powerful. And when they come along and they're there and they experience it at the same time, they see it often. But I think if you're not there, you often wonder, is it just an add-on, or is it really as rich as people talk about it?
Yeah, you bring to mind, I mean, richness, absolutely. I find myself this summer offering up far more, hey kids, to my own children, let's go for a walk. And they'll say, where are we going? And I'm like, it's a walk, you come with. Like, let's get to a place where the walk happens, as opposed to let's map it out too much on the front end. And there's a lot of local trails around the Newmarket, Aurora area that are really accessible, and you don't have to commit a full day, but you get the refreshment and you get the you get the rejuvenation out of it, where you've sort of, the experience is very different than, you kind of mentioned that limitations of the four walls. Mm-hmm. What's your view of, what is being, when you work with younger kids, either the primaries or juniors, what is it about that age that really, really does lend itself well to outdoor learning? What do you think it is?
So I think this whole, I think it's the curiosity, right? They are still asking questions about the world. They're still so curious about it. And it's just innate, right? The why questions, if you tap into that and allow that to lead your learning, it engages them, it engages you. And I think those learners, that curiosity just is unending, right? And as long as you don't shut it down and provide, I think as an outdoor educator, it's often hard to not just provide answers. I think traditionally outdoor education was very much let's walk on the trail and let me tell you all that I have in my head. I can tell you all the species that I know and the flora and fauna. And I feel like there's this really amazing transformation happening that in all of education that is really honoring inquiry-based learning and place-based learning and slowing it down and really taking the hat of expert off and placing the hat on that's just, I'm the guide from the side that's going to just really encourage those questions and encourage the thinking. provide some trail maps here and there, some signage to help them along their journey, but really they're leading the way. They really are. And that's exciting for me to watch. And it's interesting for me as an educator. It keeps it real. Like you're out there and yes, I know the name of that tree, right? But to see their curiosity and ask questions that I never could have imagined, and where they take the learning, and to compare that maybe to one group versus the next and how different it can look over the same thing that they're seeing is incredible.
I like the it's funny that the why I've come to appreciate it. I can, as a parent and my kids going there, I work to sort of stay in that space because being open to the why. It's funny. I've done a lot of reflection this past summer about the work I need to do to sort of dive a little bit deeper into move away from marks, get closer to better feedback, better conversation loops for students, reduce the number of summatives. So get that conversation. I guess what it kind of comes down to is get the conversations that happen inside education less teachery. That's the one half. The second half, I've started to really I've started to inquire about my own inquiry skills and the expectation that a really great question that excites the answerer, did I say that right? Isn't as important as a question that excites the questioner. And I had a hard time. It was sort of like over the summer, it was an aha moment. My expectation that my students should be asking questions that excite me isn't as important as them finding a question that excites them. I don't necessarily, I would be more than happy to be excited by great questions from my students. But I love the fact that they find questions that keep them interested. And when I watch my own children right now, the age that they're at, they tend to be a lot of why without much sort of substantive extension on that. But the energy is there. Like they want to know why that bug has 6 legs. They want to know why is that log leaning on that rock? And I can completely fabricate an answer. Sometimes I know, sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
But I realize I have to check why are you asking this question again? Because it's a question that excites them. What does that bring to mind for you? Just that endless number of questions.
So whenever someone brings up questions, it takes me right back to I took a forest school practitioner course and through Forest Schools Canada. And in the middle of our 5 days in Canmore, Alberta, our instructor from the UK was talking about how it's an art to ask questions, right? And to interact through question, and that there should be a PhD on questioning, right? And I agree. And we actually talked for hours about it. What, as an educator, it's such a delicate balance of what question you ask initially, and maybe you shouldn't be asking it initially. Maybe it's the students that ask the initial question, and then how to follow up and how to lead without leading, right? How to lead from behind with your questions. And sometimes you nail it and you feel it, you walk away, you're like, oh, that was beautiful. I felt like I didn't interfere with the learning, but I was just keeping it going in the direction that maybe, there's a specific learning goal that you need to get to, and you can see the map maybe in your mind of the curriculum for that grade, and you really want to maybe get them someplace, and there's that reality. We still have to cover curriculum. But then there's some times that you shut it down, right? Your question is the wrong question. And sometimes I've looked at video from this past year, and I've captured some video that I didn't intend to capture. the time when you have your phone on and you don't realize it and it's videoing. And I've listened to myself, and I've listened to the good and the bad, right? In terms of my questions or my directives when they're not supposed to be directives. So I really would love to pursue a master's or PhD in questioning if I had time.
No, I totally get it. So when I came into teaching, I was fortunate. I actually got to teach grade 11 hospitality. And one of the things that I broke And it wasn't I fixed it. You sort of break something, and then all I said to myself is, I'm not going to break that again. So it wasn't an actual fix. It's like, I'm not going to do that thing again. When you realize that there's, you're creating negative energy in the classroom. So one of the things that I did, and it was definitely, it was a chef thing. So coming out of hospitality, the scrutiny that I would put my staff under all the time, was entirely because it was a bureaucracy, right? There was a business that I was running. There was always numbers that drove the outcome and the goal, if you will. It wasn't necessarily about the relationships, although that was important too. It was about the money at the end, about the numbers. So scrutiny was very finely focused, making sure that things, the labor was balanced and waste was balanced, and that the customers were happy. It was easy checklists. So when I moved into the classroom and I was teaching hospitality, I taught like that. And what I would do is I would draw attention right away to the successes to the whole group. And in my mind, I thought, okay, this group over here is making an amazing bread dough. Come on over, everybody, come on over. Come on over and see how amazing this bread dough is, which may be valuable learning to see. But what I had broken was students' flow in exploring their own learning. So I quickly had to figure out, how do I allow for that flow to continue, for me to observe it, and for the students to not feel like they're under that lens of constant scrutiny? And I didn't have an answer right away. It wasn't until I started adding in digital tools and saying, okay, you're going to be tracking your own learning and keep a food blog and all this kind of stuff. And then I would review it outside of class time, as opposed to always stopping learning and saying, hey, everybody, look at this. Look how awesome this group is.
And I think early years, it does that really well, right? In terms of not interrupting the flow of the day. Like, kids really get in a groove, and why pull them aside from their deep learning when you can just sit and maybe just observe for a little while and find out, what they're digging deeply into. And you get more out of them that way, right? Especially for our early learners. But I think I've been arguing lately that play is, play can look very differently. Play can look like someone playing with food and creating something, right? I think if we interrupt that flow at any age, right? Think of ourselves as adults when you're really into something and someone, interjects and takes you in a totally different direction. It's really frustrating, right? And so I think I'm advocating for play in all levels. And I think there has been, a lot of discussion around risky play and play in terms of through loose parts, and just letting kids have the time to really do first and then reflect after is really important from what I have seen.
Yeah, I've was following a conversation just late last week between two humans in my digital PLN, Andrew Campbell and Aviva Dunziger. And Aviva is she's got a play space out back. She's got an outdoor classroom. She's, I think, in JKSK. And in talking with her, aside from this conversation, I said, man, I just had this image of you, because she posts a lot of stuff to Instagram. So she has all the agreements and sign-offs with her families, and she blocks out faces, but she posts a lot of videos. So that's one of her assessment tools. And I said, I just had this vision of you kind of like in a tree stand, or like some sort of a leaf suit hiding down between, two rocks, to capture these two students that are organizing sticks in a fashion. They're building a bridge with mud and supports and structures and putting rocks on it to see if it'll stand. And she said, it's kind of like that. She really does stay back from identifying learning if it interrupts the play. And her perspective seems to be, I don't want to speak on her behalf, but what I observe in this, which is very different from my reality, is that in the classroom, let's say if a student writes a good piece, a good poem, I think in some ways clapping and crying and wanting to give the student a hug for that poem is a powerful feedback tool, probably more powerful than saying you've satisfied the success criteria for figurative writing. So
Absolutely.
Introducing those assessment tools into the conversation for me has always been a struggle, or it's a struggle to find the balance, basically, What's your take on learning while playing? Because the conversation between Aviva and Andrew that I started with is that Andrew's contention was that if it's actual play, then it's without intention. If you're learning, there's intention.
Yeah, and I think it paves the way for learning, right? I think
Okay.
that play takes you to the learning if you allow it to, if you give it enough time. I've seen people I've seen groups of students, 10 minutes just doesn't cut it, right? They need to be immersed in play for, I think, a chunk of time. And then that really does lead to intellectual learning, social learning, physical learning, right? Emotional learning. I
Mm-hmm.
think it is the foundational for all the other skills that come later. And I think when I watch my own kids, when I watch students that I teach, it amazes me how I can actually pinpoint someone who's around the same developmental age. I can tell if someone's good at play. Does that make sense? And then I
Yeah.
can compare and say, wow, well, that's too bad. That kid really hasn't had an opportunity to play in rich environments, right? And sometimes kids just sit there and they don't know what to do with loose parts. They don't know what to do, right, with themselves, because they don't have those skills, those foundational skills. So I think yeah, I think that play is crucial, and I'm just through Forest School Canada. I'm learning so much more about play in the outdoors as well. So, outdoor play is not, playing a sport. It's freely chosen. They have directed what they're doing. It's intrinsically motivated, and obviously in outdoor play, it's outside. But they're really driving it themselves. There is no adult telling them, why don't you do this, or here is a provocation to use these and use them a certain way, and there's a template to say create this, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
really just freely chosen. So student voice and choice, right, is the key to outdoor play, and it's wonderful to watch.
I want to take you back to the Trails Youth Initiative, if you're cool with that.
Sure.
So, um, again, one of the things that I've observed is that when we talk, not when we, sorry, wrong start. What I've observed is that when outdoor education or place based, I guess play, but let's say place based education occurs, what I've seen is that when it's junior and primary, the focus is learning primarily. When we're talking about junior into intermediate and senior, it tends to be about self-regulation. Have you noticed this? And I'm talking about a little bit how it's marketed. And I could be missing resources, and if there's other resources that kind of equalize that, but it strikes me that that there's more time spent developing that voice and choice and play, evolving into learning at the younger ages. And then when we include that exact same type of initiative, that someone at that table is saying, well, you know what, it would be really great if we had outdoor education because high school students are stressed and they need mindfulness.
Right.
Have you noticed anything in that balance?
I think it's more about a we're noticing almost too late, right?
Okay.
In the high school level, it's like putting a band-aid on a problem, right? And saying, oh, wait a second, right? We really need this. And I think we needed it, right? 10 years before that, as more of a foundational skill, right? But I hear you. I just think I would maybe I would be inclined to say that there's so much talk about self-regulation now in the earlier years too, that that probably weaves all the way through. But there's actually Jacob Rodenberg, and I hope I'm saying his name correctly, at Camp. It's not coming to me, but he's developed this kind of continuum of outdoor, we could call it environmental literacy or environmental learning. He's looked at different developmental stages, which is interesting actually, and it ties into what you're saying at the different the different stages. So I'm interested in that was just introduced to us at our outdoor ed team before the summer, and I've been digesting it, and it was shaped in the form of a pyramid, which also fascinates me, right? I love models, and I was working around this model thinking, I don't know if it's a pyramid as much as a continuum, but I do think that all skills are developed at different, right? At different stages, just on a different level. When I worked with Trails kids, I think their their deal was more about personal, like learning about themselves. But when I thought about play, I actually could see them on a Friday night. We'd pick them up from downtown Toronto. They'd arrive at our site and they'd still be guarded, right? They'd still have that kind of bubble of protection, like, you're not going to talk to me, you're not going to get at me. um, just this hardness. And we would see the flow. And by Saturday, there would be a softer side and would open up. And then by Sunday, by the time they would have to get in the van and go home Sunday afternoon, it would almost be like that protection, right, would be put back on again. But they loved to play when they were there. When I think back, like, they were playing literally kick the can and camouflage out in the forest, and they didn't have a chance to do that any other time except, and they told me this, my time at Trails allows me to be a kid. But, these were 15 and 16-year-olds. But I think that play is valuable at any age. And I think especially when I think back to Trails kids and on the canoe trips, the same thing, right? They just craved playing all the time. But through that would learn about themselves and learn about, their boundaries and problem solving and critical thinking and all those skills. But yeah, I could just picture them eventually, when they felt comfortable, they would come on a Friday night, and that hardness would, I guess, that process would be speeded up a little bit more. And sometimes they would be planning before their weekend what they were going to do with one another, right? So I don't know if that answers your question. I went on a little bit of a tangent, but yeah.
That it totally works. It's a challenge that I guess what it's I get the continuum. Totally get the continuum. Totally agree with you as well, is that the focus, let's say the focus of self-regulation right now, it is going towards the junior grades. It is saying we need to help them to be able to help themselves. And what I just had observed was that it's the learning, again, the learning that seems to be the focus from, let's say, play-based education or place-based education. The learning takes up a lot of the space, and then self-regulation can be as an outcome of that outdoor education. And where I see that kind of flipped a little bit at secondary is that some of the programming that I've seen that includes outdoor classroom, they can do a lot of different things. Now, I look at almost outdoor classroom, the use of an outdoor classroom, it's fantastic if you have a green space out back that is unlike the concrete or, let's say, four walls institutional look that you have from. But I also look at place-based as just, as a class, we're going to go have a walk around the track and have a conversation, or we're going to go just sit out on a park bench and get a little bit of sun on our faces, a little bit of clean air or unfiltered air, or we're going to walk and get a tea. We're going to have movement. We're going to make it maybe kind of mindful, and we're going to spend time outside of this space, and maybe a conversation that we can bring back into the classroom will happen. So I'm kind of, and more times than not, I see at the sort of elementary is that it's woven into the classroom experience.
Right.
And at secondary, I see it's a field trip.
Right.
And that's just and again, it's just me observing on the outside, which strikes me, if you mentioned you're coming into a new role, I imagine one of the challenges is, how do you speak to the continuum and not get kind of like sidetracked by I can't do a field trip like that because I teach English.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a challenge. And I hear you. I think that, I think that we have a lot of work to do, right? In all levels, but definitely I know that there's not as much happening board wide in the secondary panel, and I agree with you. Maybe it's compartmentalized versus a more regular, repeated access to a natural space, which is what lends itself to connecting to a place, right? It doesn't have to be a beautiful green space. It could be just a patch of, right? A patch of a few trees right outside your building. But I think it's the regular repeated and seeing that space in different seasons and noticing and looking closely and seeing it change and alter. So if you're having that tea, it's different having a tea in the fall versus having it. What does it feel like to have the tea in the winter, right? How do you need to do that, right? What does it look like in the spring when things are changing? So I think encouraging that at the secondary level of how do you weave that into an English class, right? If you're writing poetry and you're writing poetry about, different seasons. I think it is a challenge, especially in the secondary scheduling, right? I know a lot of people who have tried integrated credit programs have found that they're hugely successful with the right person running it. And once that person leaves, it kind of falls apart, right?
Right.
But it needs to build momentum. People almost need to talk about it, and students obviously sharing like, this is an amazing opportunity, let's do it. But it's really risky for many students in secondary to take on that integrated credit. I think with all the pressures there are right now and at the secondary level of, are they going to learn as much in an integrated credit program, right? Are they going to tick the boxes that they need to tick to get to college or university? And I think therein lies the constant pressure that every teacher faces, right? The curriculumitis versus but I got into teaching because I really want to help this person become the best person that they can be and become a contributing member to our society. And I want them to be able to give back and feel like they're valued and, recognize them for their gifts. And how do we do both, right? That's a constant challenge. But yeah, I'm nervous about that part. I think that I think that it's a big job, right? This position and trying to build capacity. All I can think of is that we have wonderful people on our board, like we've already talked about. We have so many just forward thinkers. We have so many teams that are actually ready and have already contacted me and said, like, how can I help? What can we do? Can we create videos? Can we create, right? Can I work with the DLRTs and create some really interesting, right? Things, math team has said, what can I do? What can we do to work with outdoor learning? So I think there's so many entry points. Pamela Agua with First Nations Métis Inuit team, right? Like there's such a wonderful opportunity there for partnership. And I think there already is a partnership there. So just building on that is a wonderful thing. And if secondary students and elementary students are just using the spaces that they have and valuing those spaces and being grateful for those spaces on a regular basis, that will be like a win-win at the end of this, right? End of this term, if I feel like there's movement and momentum that people are using their spaces more and don't feel like they have to get on a bus and go somewhere and have it be a big, massive, right? Like 7-day canoe trip, that they can do place-based education and outdoor education right outside their door to make it accessible, then that I think that's a win-win.
Yeah, you bring to mind, I always like to build kind of like thought capacity sometimes even before action. So I think one of the things that occurs to me in this is that if you are using the space around your school, whatever that footprint might be, whatever the grass area might be, if you sort of choose to see the whole school as a learning space, then you automatically are demonstrating a slightly, let's say, a different point of view than someone who wishes to be just in a classroom. But I think it also automatically opens the doors to a conversation around, okay, I'm using the field out back, but I need some trees.
Okay.
I'm using the track. But you know what? I need some rocks to climb.
Yeah.
Or, we're walking the neighborhood. We need bike paths. And there's that's the type of thought capacity that I think starts to change not only community point of view, but also I think sometimes I like to believe board point of view, where when they are starting to survey, okay, what do we need in this new school we're about to open? We got this great space right downtown Aurora, across from coffee shop, bus line. So they look at this, concrete bound classroom that happens, concrete bound learning space. Somebody in that group has to say, yeah, but remember you have those 3 schools that are talking about they need trees and they need like a little river. Can we tweak the design? Can we move the school? Can we include that in the sort of like must-haves, the non-negotiables in this design first, and then we'll build the concrete around it?
I love that you brought up the concept of design, and I've one of the things I've said to people is that wouldn't that be so cool to be part of that initial team that designs the school from the beginning, right? Just to have that different perspective. And when I worked at Civil Point Outdoor Education Center, a lot of the conversations we had were about that, and that we didn't necessarily, our goal didn't necessarily mean that, all students that left the center or had these experiences that connected them to nature went on to become, David Suzuki's. That our goal was that wherever they landed in their positions, whether it be at a board table discussing school design or subway design or city design, right? That they would have that perspective, right? Of environment and connection and balance and sustainability, and that we need more people around the table that are bringing up that perspective and having a voice. And so I think that school design, there's a lot going on right now in terms of schoolyard design. And the school that I was at last year, so lucky to have the support of our parents, right? And our parents are amazing at that school. They've raised money to shift the space, right? We didn't go to them and say, here's what we need as educators. Our angle was that we went to the students, and the students visioned the school space. We encouraged them to dream big. We had a huge assembly. They had maps. They created their dream school. We consolidated. We had it down to 20 images that were from them that they were able to vote on. And then the parents said, "Wow, this is right. This is what our students want. How can we help you?" And they ended up raising over $6,000 last year,
Wow.
which is so incredible. Like parents and guardians in our communities, like we really can tap into them when it comes to, because I think it's frustrating for people to walk in, especially our new schools. There's so many new schools in New York region that are just blank slates, right? They feel like I can't do anything with this. I have no shade. I have no right. I have no nature. But I think one of the things that I love doing is talking to people about those barriers and saying, okay, what are the barriers? We're like, let's get past those barriers. What can we do? But I definitely agree with you in that instead of just looking at the barriers and fixing those, looking way back, backwards design and saying we should plant those trees to begin with would be ideal, instead of having schools, fundraise thousands of dollars or get grants and such to create that ideal environment. But if you're in that state, I think my advice is that connecting with your parent group and your community group is so valuable. And there's so many resources out there that will help you plant trees and create those green spaces and design that school ground so that it's not just, a lot of people will raise $100,000 to put a play structure in. And now the research is showing that play structure may not be the best choice, right? Like there's lots of other options that are much more valuable and provide much more, greater entry points for all kinds of different students, greater problem solving, et cetera. And That's what our school is. The school I was at last year was venturing into this, multi-phase plan of how we could create this ideal outdoor learning environment. Yeah, it's great. There's actually something happening in Ottawa, I think, in end of September. There's an internationally renowned, and I can't remember his name, I'm sorry, it's on the Forest Schools Canada website. He's doing a talk and a workshop the following day on school design, which will be great.
It's when I was looking at some of the posting in the York region, the Nature Collaborative, and I started to think about, and I think I did post this to you, that idea of the ungoogleable classroom.
I love that.
If you throw classroom into that search, you're not going to see any of this stuff. Like an image search, you're not going to see that. You're not going to see the stuff that, some of the images that are on their Facebook page look like a makerspace from a classroom. Like the stuff that they're doing, I'm like, they're doing classroom activities in open air. And it just started to make me think about, that idea when you speak to the value of having the outdoor classroom or place-based education, it made me think about, do we need maybe some new language? It's sometimes in the comparison, as soon as we say classroom, it provides sometimes the safety of understanding, but sometimes it puts the walls up. And I was in a similar space when talking to this really cool guy, Arthur, who is all about going gradeless. And that whole process of going gradeless as a teacher, the focus is like, okay, so what you're saying, you're not going to mark anything. And I said to him, is it a problem in the language? As in, we're using words from one context that don't translate well. We're forcing them to sort of work in another context. And what we're not doing, we're not building understanding in the new context, as in we're not building understanding about what it means to be outdoors by calling it a classroom. What we're doing is maybe limiting it by calling it a classroom.
Well, I think
So I put that to you. What's your thought? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, David Sobel talks a lot about place-based education, and he says, don't call it a walk. Walks are for adults, right? Adventures are for children. Adventures are for children. And it makes so much sense. And York Region Nature Collaborative grabbed that quote, and we do an adventure walk for our families every year at the Courtright Center. And it's a free event. Everyone's welcome. But it really is just, it's an adventure because you don't know where it's going to take you. I think that's what kids love about adventures. And it's honoring that student, right? Centered approach. It's saying you get to be a leader here. You get to decide what is it that you would like to do today? What is it that you're curious about? Here are some things that we can do, but there's no prerequisite of what order you have to do them in and where here's a map, like, let's go. And wherever the interest takes us, within the time constraints, and we'll have to figure it out together in terms of compromise. But I think that lends itself to just that shift of a word, right? If people will say, I'm going to go hiking with my kids. I'm like, no, don't say the word hike. For some reason, that word, that language just lends itself to not having the magic that it can have with kids, right? So I try to not use those. I try to just use adventure, right? To bring that magic in. But it also got me to think about, what was the other thing I was going to mention in terms of language? Oh, yeah. So there's a lot of chat. I went down to the Dr. Eric, it's a long word, Jackman Institute down via OAZ. It's a laboratory school all around inquiry. And I spoke with the principal there, the administrator. I don't even think he calls himself a principal. I think he has a different language altogether there. But they have to follow the Ontario curriculum. And I asked him about assessment. And he said, you know what? The one thing that we did at the school was we do not talk about tests. The word test does not exist. The word quiz does not exist. Do we assess them? Do we do quizzes and tests? You'd probably say yes, but he said we just changed the language. So he said our students here will say that they are surveyed. That's the only shift that they made. They're surveying them. They're surveying them based on what they know at the beginning, what they might know, in the middle, and what they know at the end of, an engaged inquiry. And they let them know that end, that final survey is not really a final survey. It's just what they know to that point, because they might revisit an inquiry later in the year and something might spark the conversation again, and then they might survey it later. So he said that language shift in their school, I think it's a K-6 school, had a huge impact, a ripple effect in terms of how students felt and their anxiety around assessment and evaluation. So I thought that was interesting, like just to change quiz to test, or quiz and test to survey. It for some reason has an impact on how we view learning, and maybe it shows like how much damage we've done of the negativity that's associated, the bubble around, right, quizzing and testing, and reminds me about it, or it takes me to the place of, math right now, and how we have this mindset that's really negative around math, and we're trying to shift that, right? I think it's with everything. We need to shift our mindset around education and assessment, evaluation, and I think that's important. And with outdoors, it's the same. I think we've talked about a mindset, right? An outdoor mindset. What does it mean to have an outdoor mindset? It's similar to a growth mindset, but it's a little bit different in the outdoors. So, what does it mean to step outside in the rain with your kids when it was an indoor recess, right? It can feel pretty empowering to walk outside and walk past classes and they're going, whoa, they're going outside still and it's raining. That's, it's a mindset shift. And we had a new secretary come to our school, and she said, oh my goodness, at my previous school, if parents had seen you walk outside in the rain, I would have had a phone call in 30 seconds. And I said, oh, would they be calling to say that's so great? And she said, no, they'd be calling to complain. And I said, that's so fascinating to me that mindset is so different from one part of our board to another, because the school I was at last year, the mindset was like fantastic. Send them outside. I love seeing you guys outside. I will send extra socks. How can I help you? Can I volunteer? Can I come with you? Can I bring my baby? Like they were just very supportive. So how do we shift that mindset in all of our communities, with our colleagues, right? When people don't necessarily have that mindset, right?
Yeah, it's there's that innovator's mindset, which even to label it, it's that funny thing about labeling the moment. Does it do it any justice? So when my kids are climbing in the tree, and they, like my own children, and they get up to that next branch, one of the two of them are like, look, Daddy, look. Like they're looking for that feedback and assessment and acknowledgement that they've leveled up.
Yep.
I love the moments, though, where they don't. They just kind of go and do something that in my mind, it might go, I should tell them to come, but this is a brave moment. Like you sort of, and to even call it out as brave, I think sometimes gives an improper marker, as in you don't have to return to this exact spot and activity to demonstrate positive risk and bravery. You just have to get comfortable with making those decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really demonstrated when someone goes outside of the classroom or outside the box, let's say, and say, you know what, just because it's raining outside, there is no harm that comes to you from, well, unless you turn it into a science lesson and factories are side, unless you actually know something about the composition of the rain, going outside or being outside where it's a little bit cold or a little bit, breezy or sunny for that matter, existing in that outdoor space, it's not that it's, the argument that it's somehow safer or better to be inside of the four walls becomes moot, because when you can tease out why it's great to be outside.
Well, and in fact, there's this position statement that came out that identified that it's actually riskier to have kids inside. I mean on a larger scale, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Broad swath.
Riskier to have them inside than out. And so and it actually backs it up with all this research for educators, for community members, for, daycare, early childcare providers, and and parents. And it actually does a great job of laying it all down to say the fears or the perceived fears that we have about those risks. And it identifies, the difference between a hazard and a risk. So, the likelihood of harm and the severity of harm determines the level of risk. So is it likely that we're going to be harmed outside in the rain? What's the severity of harm? Someone might be a little uncomfortable. We might have to come in and they might have wet shoes. We'll have to change their shoes. They might slip because it's right. There's a slippery rock, but what is that level of risk and what is the benefit? Do the benefits outweigh that risk? And what can we do to mitigate that risk? What can we do to reduce that risk? And, proper footwear and proper equipment and talking to them about stuff like that, experience, right? That, I think nothing replaces kids' experience, right? Of, what did it feel like when you're on that rock and it was raining? It was slippery. Okay. So it really does build that foundation of having an outdoor mindset and being capable and competent when they go outside, and they can teach others, right? Which is what we want, for them to then take their parents outside on the weekends and say, be careful, Mom, when it rains, the rocks are slippery. Like, that's a beautiful moment.
No, but that's the generalization of learning that I crave in a lot of ways. The students that I work with, I often ask myself, will what they've learned with me today, will it make it outside the classroom?
Yeah.
Well, heck, if it's already outside of what we, let's say, underscore, highlight, cross out, whatever you want to say, don't use the word classroom. But if they learn something in a school setting, whatever the school setting that might be, I'd say a huge measure of success is whether or not they're willing to share it with somebody else.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times my kids have come to me and said, I do something like, Mrs. Smith said you shouldn't do that, Daddy. So they're referring to, one of their teachers. I'm like, yeah. Mrs. Smith is right. Daddy made a mistake. You're right. Yeah. But don't walk on the rocks. Or this is a raspberry. Eat the raspberries from higher on the bush. Or this is peppermint, right? This is a leaf you can't eat. Like, this type of outdoor knowledge, generalizing to life, is the sweet spot, eh?
Well, and I gotta say, it warmed my heart this summer. All these students that I got to work with last year, in my role of basically not being inside the classroom all year, just taking them outside, was that I had all these messages through the summer, and I didn't mind. Like, I welcomed it, because I think I sent a message on our canoe trip to Quetico, and I got this, like, all these pictures of students saying, oh, so-and-so wanted, Mrs. Murray to see me in our forest, our magical forest, or so-and-so recognized milkweed and wanted to show you a picture. And it was just lovely to know that ripple effect was happening, and that kids were going outside with their families all summer, right? It was continuing. And, at the end of the year, I gave them, so-called homework, and their homework was really to just get outside. But I think it was just lovely to see the continuation. And, I've had some parents contact me saying, I didn't know this at the time, but I'm in the board too, and I'd really love support. I would like to start doing what you were doing. Like, I didn't know there was outdoor education roles in a school, and really there aren't, but they're starting to creep up, right? Like, this is happening. Like, a modern learning leadership role is turning into a outdoor learning role, right? / modern learning, because outdoor learning fits beautifully within modern learning. And I think that's the community, the opportunity for community involvement in this movement, I guess we could call it, or this direction that we're going in to get kids outside and learning outside, is powerful, right? Parents may or may not engage in, right, math, but they might have their own, right, hesitation in doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
But going outside is brings them back to their own childhood, and it really connects families and is a beautiful thing. So I'm finding that community draw is really powerful.
So we're creeping up to the end here, and I got the I'll tell you that the heart of the podcast, at least my 1.0 season of it was looking at some of the cool changes in education, and definitely the subtext to this is, including the stuff that makes the teachers feel like they're thriving alongside with their students. And I from the get-go, I get it. You love your teaching area. You love what you're doing in education. I don't think anyone listening to this podcast would argue that at all. I'm curious about what you're chasing next. So you've mentioned before that you're moving into a new role, and it's a new role for the board. If I say, don't speak to that directly, but let's talk to, let's say, outdoor education as a broader palette here, a bigger landscape. What is it within that broader landscape that you feel, is that you're chasing going into September? Is it a mindset? Is it an activity? Is it a specific sort of strategy? What are you thinking?
There's lots of sort of things that I've mapped out. But I think the most crucial thing is that I have learned, especially when you're really passionate about something, and you could probably connect to this with technology, right? Some people just feel really anxious around technology, and I had to have a little conversation with you to prep for this. I've never done a podcast before. But when you are encouraging others to step outside the box and take risks and, be daring, and do something new, you have to meet them where they're at, right? And so I think what I have learned in just honoring everyone's place along that outdoor learning, if we want to call it continuum, or that outdoor mindset continuum, right? That we all, we are where we are, and you have to meet someone there. And then I've been labeled recently as a nudger, right? That I'm not a pusher, I'm just a nudger, right? That you're gently bringing them along, and if they want to, right? It has to do with if they want to, and it has to be intrinsic, just like we're asking of our students to drive the learning. We need to ask each other, our colleagues, to do the same thing. And if it's something folks are interested in building capacity, then just really forming that network and like a mentorship group, because this position alone, you can't. We have actually a few others on the outdoor education team. We need mentorship happening in our board, right? And it's already happening, and there's so many key people that can help to build that capacity, that I think it's just really honoring people where they're at. And I think you can't fake the passion of outdoor learning, right? You really, really can't. It's kids can sort of see right through that. And so what I found is that it's really hard to ask people to take kids outside in an authentic way and experientially with passion, if they haven't had the experience themselves. And I find that a lot of us have sort of lost that maybe connection that we had when we were kids, right, to the natural world. And I feel like the first step is almost, if we want people to inspire their kids, they have to be inspired themselves, and they have to have those experiences. And, they need to feel what it's like to sit on a sit spot and really just, right?
No, I gotcha.
Be mindful. So I think that's a lot of the vision of the board. And I'm definitely on that mindset, is to really build a really strong network of educators. And I say educators because I think oftentimes we've said teachers and we haven't included all of our educators. And I think I'm really trying to focus my language on that, because so many people have come up to me and said, wow, there's all this professional development, but it's not available to me. Why isn't it, and I'll say, well, why isn't it available to you? I didn't realize that. And now we're really trying as a board to make everything available to everyone. And we have a custodian in our board who basically, should be hailed as the environmental mentor of the world, right? She's amazing in what she does in her school. And And so it's like, it's just finding a place for everybody on that continuum. And if they want to shift through venturing or, learning from others, or just diving in and taking a risk and learning along the way, then I would like to be somebody who can support that. So I'm trying to brainstorm how, right? How do I support that? What can I provide? How can I connect all the dots with all the things that are already happening? How can I, like you said, the ungoogleable classroom, how can I make it more accessible so that you can Google, right? And you can find
for it to come up on the list.
Yeah, let's have us on the list. Some people need how do I start, right? Tools. Some people need some guidance there, and so how can we provide those tools? That's sort of a starting point, but lots of thoughts about parent engagement as well. And I really would like to develop a directory of expertise in our communities, right? What do we have that we can tap into already, right? The knowledge is in the room, the knowledge is in the community. How can we tap into that? How can we make that accessible? If we're in the middle of a beautiful inquiry outside, that if we have an expert in our community that could come in and speak to our students, that is available and accessible to us. So trying to think about things like that as well.
That's awesome. Beyond the scope of stepping into the new role for you, new role for board, I'm excited for you. I'm totally excited for you.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome. So we're at the end. We made it.
That wasn't as hard as I thought.
it was awesome. But before we completely, get on to our days and our adventure walks, or wherever the rest of the few hours, the eclipse today, I guess.
Yeah.
Where would you like to be found? If people are reaching out, they want to have another conversation with you, or share ideas or share resources, where would you like to be found?
Right. So probably Twitter is the best. I'm at Inspire Outside, which kind of connected to our board's vision of inspire learning, and I changed that to Inspire Outside. That's probably the best way, and I'd love to connect with people. I don't even know my extension at my new job yet, so we'll be diving in September, and Twitter's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Cool. I'll include that in the show notes.
Amazing.
And thank you for giving me your time in the summer. I appreciate you taking time out of family time. That was very cool, and I'm happy that we made the connection today. I
am too. Thanks so much, and huge gratitude for all the work that's being done to, make learning more accessible and engage students more. Because I think, we're doing some great things in our board, and I love that you're speaking to all of those great things.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. And when I get to meet new instructors and, be able to showcase a little bit of the awesome that's going on, it makes it easy.
Cool. Well, thanks for teaching me about podcasts.
You're very welcome. I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Cool.
And definitely good luck in September.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Take care.
Yeah.
Chasing Squirrels podcast can be found on Podbean and iTunes. If you want to have a conversation on the podcast, please reach out to me. Probably the best way to connect with me is on Twitter. So that would be at Chris J. Clough. I also blog a little bit on WordPress. Feel free to check in on some of those topics. And I really do appreciate the time you spent with the podcast. Thank you for listening, and have a fantastic evening.